So last time we were talking about okay. So we were talking about the Cultural Renaissance in the context of Kalakaua's strengths. His first strength was the economy itself. Recognition of Hawaii. There are a lot of treaties negotiated during his time. And then on the Hawaiian side, the Renaissance. Hula, mele, Hawaiian history, mo'olelo, that means stories and also history. Wahipana, place-based stories. And genealogy, mo'okuauhau. And la'aulapa'a, Hawaiian medicine. Kalakaua was the merry monarch. They used to have big parties that would go on for almost a month on his birthday. When it was his 50th birthday, he had the King's Jubilee, which was modeled after the Queen's Jubilee, which I think you know that song from a couple years ago. Yeah, seniors last year or the year before? Queen's Jubilee. So that's his sister, right? Lili'u comes back, writes the song, and Kalakaua hears all about the Queen's Jubilee, and he's inspired and makes the King's Jubilee. Queen's Jubilee was Queen Victoria's 50th anniversary of her reign. She reigned for about 60 years. Kalakaua had his King's Jubilee on his 50th birthday because he knew he wasn't going to reign for 50 years. Okay, that's all strengths. But some of these are seen as weaknesses by sugar growers, right? Cultural Renaissance is not flourishing of Hawaiian culture, it's backsliding into pagan and heathen practices, pre-Christian practices. Remember, these sugar growers a lot of them are the sons of missionaries. Iolani Palace was not seen as a great symbol of the Hawaiian kingdom, but an unnecessary luxury for himself, for the king himself. Just a big fancy house, paid for by tax dollars. Also, a weakness turned out to be his involvement with these non-Hawaiians, Cesar Moreno, Klaus Spreckels, and Walter Murray Gibson. Just to try to help you remember them. Julius Caesar, Santa Claus, yes, and Walter Murray Gibson was actually the great-great-great-grandfather of the guy who invented my favorite website, KS Connect. Okay, so we're going to go over each one of these people. You guys got that? Sorry? Yeah, he kind of does. Okay, Moreno. Moreno was the guardian of some Hawaiians who were educated in Europe, and specifically, in his case, Italy. Kalakaua started what they call the study abroad program. You know how we always tell you guys, go away for school, get the experience? Yeah? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Kalakaua was saying that in the 1870s. So we think that that's some advanced idea. He was saying that, almost 150 years ago. The most famous of these leaders young leaders, future leaders, was Robert Wilcox, who we're going to talk about later. He ended up staging a rebellion to try to overthrow the overthrowers because he went to a military academy. So Moreno was his guardian in Italy. He also tried to start a steamship line. Santa Claus here, Klaus Spreckels, was involved in a bunch of scandals One of them was that he claimed to have bought the crown lands, the king's lands, from Princess Ruth. The only problem is Princess Ruth doesn't own the crown lands. Kalakaua does. But he was so powerful because the king owed him a lot of money. He was a very wealthy sugar grower, a German who was growing sugar in California, but he came to Hawaii after the reciprocity treaty because he could see that he could make more profits here. And so he buys these lands, and when it turns out he didn't really buy anything, he forces the legislature to buy them back from him at a profit. He's also the one who convinced Kalakaua to create the Kalakaua silver dollar. Now those dollars, you can still buy them at coin shops today, but back then they were sold into circulation and then devaluated, right? Because money is only worth what people think it's worth. So Spreckles got Kalakaua in trouble, and he had a nickname, which was the uncrowned King of Hawaii. Because he was a poker playing buddy of the king would lose and owe him money. He would just give him like an IOU. He ended up, both the king personally and the country, Hawaii, the kingdom, were in debt to Spreckles. So he could kind of get away with things after that. And then there was Gibson. He was charged with a lot of scandals, which for the last 15 years, I haven't been able to say for sure whether these scandals are true or false. But around last year, there was a PhD dissertation written on this topic, and it seems that they found that all these scandals were false, because the people charging him with the scandals are Kalakaua's enemies. So your enemy's friend is your enemy, right? And they are Kalakaua's enemy. Gibson is Kalakaua's friend, and so they are Gibson's enemy. So they charged him of selling public offices, like wannabe Minister of Finance, give you $5,000. They charged him with making exemptions for Hansons or leprosy patients, like pay me if you don't want to go to Kalaupapa. And they charged him with getting involved in drug trading of opium by selling extra licenses. Opium was regulated. It was legal but regulated. Opium, if you don't know, is the root drug, the base drug of heroin. And a lot of Chinese immigrants came to Hawaii already addicted. Because they were already addicted, there was really no way to fight this epidemic. And so what they tried to do was limit it by allowing people a license to have an amount for their own use. Kind of like medical marijuana today. But they were saying Gibson would sell like multiple licenses to people, and then they could sell off the extra. He also tried to get Kalakaua to start a Pacific Empire. With Kalakaua becomes king of Hawaii, but also emperor of the Pacific, and under him would be the king of Samoa, for example. So they actually went to Samoa and tried to make a treaty with them. That treaty actually exists, but the whole thing was a big disaster. So all these things were not looking very good for Kalakaua. That's what makes him weak. People start questioning him, questioning his judgment, and the sugar growers use this as a time to seize and try to strip him of power. You guys got this? You have this? Okay, because the sugar growers are a small number. We're talking about, if you look at this big circle here, everybody involved with sugar. It's somewhere between 1,500 and at the most 2,000 people. But they're very organized. Within that, they had their own army, basically. The Honolulu Rifles was technically a rifle club, shooting club, but it was actually a militia or a military for the sugar growers. They had their own military, about 400 of them. And then within that, they had a secret group, maybe less than 100, we don't really know, called the Hawaiian League. HL stands for Hawaiian League. And there was one more group, which was pretty much most of these people, called the Reform Party. That was their political party. The point here is that you can use organizations to accomplish things. There's a kind of a Western way to do it, and Hawaiians were slowly learning this process. Today there's a lot of Hawaiian organizations. So back then, the foreign population had a head start on that way of organizing. They're very organized. Okay, Hawaiian League. We don't know too much about it since it was secret, but we know one thing, which is that there were no Hawaiians in the Hawaiian League. How do we know? Well, the oath to get into the league said, I promise to keep secret the existence and purpose of this league to protect the white community of this kingdom. So there you see, no Hawaiians. It was about race. Lauren Thurston, best friend of William O. Smith, as in the office, and leader of the overthrow. Lauren Thurston admitted this in 1936, when he was nice and safe surrounded by American ships at Pearl Harbor. If he had admitted it back in 1887, he'd be hanged, because this is the highest crime, treason. Because what they were really planning was the overthrow, or at least a partial overthrow. Here's a Honolulu Rifles member. You know, I don't know if any of your parents go to Hawaii Kai and go to the shooting range, fire off a few rounds. Yeah? Nothing wrong with that. Unless they wear uniforms and practice some marching and do military drills. Then it's a problem, because they're not just citizens exercising their Second Amendment rights. They are terrorists, right? And Honolulu Rifles were doing that. They had uniforms, they had officers, they had marching and drills and secret planning sessions. They were terrorists and traitors, like William Owen Smith. Okay, so in 1887, easiest date to remember in this whole class, 1887, right? It's right here. The scandals became public. The Reform Party that's their public face. They're doing the thing you're supposed to do, write letters. It's very civilized. Write letters, make petitions, yeah? Like our petition, Kumu Glasgow's students' petition. That's how you're supposed to do it. But what if Kumu Glasgow had been building an army to do like a siege on on Smith office? Then that's not the right way to do it, right? So they had their public face doing the right thing, petitions, and their secret side, the side that's ready to do violence. Along with all these scandals, Gibson's cabinet resigned. So, Gibson, by the way, he had a nickname, which was the Minister of Everything. Because there were times when he'd be Minister of two things at once, like Minister of Finance and Minister of Foreign Affairs, or whatever. Minister of Everything. So he resigns, and it's like they're hoping that Gibson resigning will protect the king. Right? I don't know if you remember the Watergate scandal from the 70s, President Nixon. Watergate. The only president ever to resign was Richard Nixon. Yeah. So before he resigned, the vice president resigned. So people were resigning up the chain and they were trying to protect him. But they couldn't protect him, so it went all the way up and he resigned. Yeah. That's what they're hoping will happen here, is that the king doesn't have to resign or step down or be overthrown by Gibson getting out of the way, because he's the real problem. But the Hawaiian League says that's not enough. Gibson's resignation is not enough. The king must be prepared to take his own proper place and be content to reign without ruling. What does that mean? Reign without ruling. Aren't they the same thing? What is reign? That word is in sovereign. Right? What's the difference between that and ruling? No idea? No thought? No guesses? I'll give you a hint. Kamehameha III reigned without ruling from the time he was 11 until the time he was 18 or 20. Yeah, so he reigned, that means he sat on the throne. But he didn't rule, he didn't actually have power. And so they're saying that the king, Kalakaua's proper place is to be like Kauhiaoli when he was a little kid, to reign without ruling. Does that make sense? Crystal clear? Okay, fist to 5. Fist to 5. Crystal clear is a 5. Makes no sense whatsoever as a fist. Okay, here's the interesting part. Kalakaua actually helps them to prevent an uprising. Kalakaua gets the royal guard, his own personal guard of 90 men, to help the Honolulu Rifles to keep the Hawaiians from storming the palace and killing all those guys. In other words, he's helping them to strip him of his own power. Why would he do that? Think about that, and I'll just go on to what happens next. With the Honolulu Rifles marching around the palace, the cabinet presents Kalakaua with a new constitution called, well, what he called the Bayonet Constitution. That's a constitution that would make the king into a puppet. Okay, the real name of this constitution was just the Constitution of 1887. Kalakaua called it the Bayonet Constitution. What is a bayonet? Well, we just saw one. Right there, yeah? It's like a little sword at the end of a rifle. Because these are the days, this is 1887, the rifles they had were like you could load only a limited number of bullets, maybe just one, I don't know. You load it, it takes about 3 minutes, and you fire off a shot and then you have to load again. Meanwhile, the enemy's charging your trench, and you can't just say, wait, I have to load. You got to fight, so you got to have something to fight with, and that's the bayonet. Okay, for very close combat. Okay, so Kalakaua was calling this constitution the Bayonet Constitution. What does he mean by that? What does that bayonet have to do with the Constitution? Exactly. Signed at gunpoint. And guns at the time had bayonets at the end of them. Right? Signed at gunpoint. Okay? So, now it wasn't literally signed at gunpoint. They didn't have a gun pointed right at his head. But Honolulu Rifles are walking around the palace. They're literally right outside the walls of the palace, circling around. So they're not right at his head, but they're literally 10 feet away outside the building. So it's virtually signed at gunpoint. Okay. I would do an icebreaker right now, but I'm recording, so I'm just gonna get to the end. We're pretty close now. Whenever you look at a law, there's two things you have to think about. This is important. Two things with any law, it's do you like it or not? That's one thing. The second thing is it legal? And those are not the same thing. You not liking a law doesn't make it illegal, right? And there are such things as illegal laws in the sense like they could be unconstitutional. Yeah. But they're not unconstitutional because you disagree with it, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so right now marijuana is still illegal, as far as I know. It's like almost legal, but it's still illegal. You might not like that law, but does that mean that the law itself is an illegal law? No. It could be perfectly legal. So we're going to talk about those two things. First, we're going to talk about why it's bad. Well, just to say it's bad, if it's bad for one group, it's good for another group, right? We say it's bad for Kalakaua, and therefore it's bad for Hawaiians. It's good for sugar growers. So bad and good is always relative. Illegal and legal is not relative. It's much more, you can actually prove that it's legal or illegal. You can't necessarily prove that it's bad or good. That's a point of view. Make sense? Okay, so why is it bad for Hawaiians and good for sugar growers? It's bad for Hawaiians because the cabinet, which is his closest advisors, can override the king. Oh, and here's one piece that we missed, which is that when Gibson resigned, they appointed a cabinet, a group of advisors, who were his arch enemies. And those are the ones who can override the king. Now, imagine for a moment that Obama got into some big scandal, like he embezzled $1 million from the government, I don't know, some scandal. And because of that, instead of overthrowing him, the Republicans said, okay, you got to replace all your advisors with our people. So your new Secretary of State is going to be Sarah Palin. Your new Secretary of Defense is going to be Donald Trump. And your new Secretary of Interior will be John McCain or Ted Cruz. Can you imagine that happening? That will never happen, right? That would never happen. That's impossible, right? But that's exactly what happened to Kalakaua. His cabinet became his arch enemies. So he was literally surrounded by his arch enemies. And they've just made a constitution where they have the power over him. They just override whatever he wants to do. The legislature can override the king. And is this necessarily bad? Can the legislature of the United States override the president? Yeah, with a 2/3 majority, right? They can override a veto. Right, gang? So that's good, that's democratic. This is not bad in itself, except they changed the voting requirements of who would be in the legislature to say Europeans, Americans, and Hawaiians can vote if they have sufficient property and income. And it wasn't just any amount of property, it was $3,000 worth of property or $600 a year in income. Okay, so this is not bad necessarily by itself, but with these new voting requirements, it was going to make the majority of the legislature white. After 1887, the majority of the Hawaiian legislature were foreigners. So there's always a question with laws of what does the law allow you to do and what would you actually do. Okay, I'll give you an example in the American context again. Obama. Think of the football team. Obama passed a law, and we signed a law in 2011 called the National Defense Authorization Act. Super boring, right? Like, why would you possibly be interested in it? Well, that law had a little provision that said that the government can arrest you, detain you, put you in some kind of prison, basically, indefinitely with no trial. Yeah. Your right to a trial was suspended in 2011. Now, Obama has not used that power. But he signed the law, and when he signed it, he said, I signed this with great reservations and blah, blah, blah. And man, he didn't want to sign it, he didn't use it, but he's giving that power possibly to Donald Trump, right? Who probably would use it. Yeah? Anybody he doesn't like, arrested, imprisoned, no trial. So, this is the question. The cabinet can override the king, but will they? Will they override him? In the question of something like Pearl Harbor, giving up Pearl Harbor. Yeah, they will. So they can and they will. And the legislature can override the king, and they probably wouldn't until the next election where they elect with these requirements, and then they would override the king. Does that make sense? Blank stares means yes. Okay, so that's why it's bad for Hawaiians. It's also why it's good for foreigners. It's good for sugar growers. Bad and good is just a point of view. Illegal is not a point of view. The Bannett Constitution is illegal. If you're trying to think when you're taking the test, why is the Bannett Constitution illegal? Just think it's because of the bayonet. The bayonet itself makes it illegal. It's signed under duress, meaning threat. Threat of violence or overthrow. That alone is automatically illegal. It's kind of like those confessions of crimes that the police get, and they find out they were made under torture. You guys have heard of this, yeah. And that's the problem that we're talking about when Bush and Cheney were still in office. That Cheney was a big supporter of torture for terrorist suspects. And people were saying it's wrong to torture people, even no matter how bad they are, because people who are tortured could eventually say anything. They just admit to anything, right? It doesn't matter if it's true or not. So confessions under torture are not accepted in a court. Same thing with this. Documents signed under threat are not accepted. So let me give you an example. Let's say I owned a mansion on Kahala Beach, right on the beach. It's like 20,000 square feet, 2 acres. How much do you think something like that would go for? It's nice, like granite, hardwood floors. Going up. About 20 to 26 million for something like that. Okay, so I own a $26 million mansion, and one day I walk into a bank to see what they call a notary public. A notary public is a person who stamps official documents to say that this signature here, it really is the person who it's supposed to be. It's not forged. Right? So I walk in one day to the notary public, and I'm all sweating, and behind me is this guy who's 6'7", 375, with a jacket on, and in his jacket he's got his hand like this. And he's walking behind me, and he's going, "Sign the paper." And I'm all sweating, and I go, "Excuse me, Mr. Notary, I'd like to sign over my Kahala Beach mansion to this gentleman here for $1. Yeah? The notary is not supposed to sign, not supposed to notarize that paper. Because my signature is under duress. Same thing. It's automatically illegal. So if one little property of 2 acres in Kahala is illegal to transfer under duress, then is a constitution legal under duress, to be signed under duress? No, it's automatically illegal. This is not debatable, right? Whether the Constitution, the Bayonet Constitution is good or bad, that's a point of view. That it's illegal is not a point of view. It simply is illegal. It was not ratified anyway by the legislature nor by the people. Interestingly, we have a constitution, right? 2 months ago, Na'Iaupuni Constitution. Your constitution for you Hawaiian people, right? Guess what? Not ratified. It's not going to be ratified. Because if there's an election of ratification, they know that the Supreme Court of the U.S. is going to stop it. So they're just saying, we're not going to ratify. We're just going to say, this is it, done deal. We're all under this, Hawaiians under this constitution. No consent. So, that Na'Iaupuni Constitution, you might say, is as illegal as the Bayonet Constitution. Which even the people who hate all the Hawaiians and want them all dead, even they admit the Bayonet Constitution is illegal. And those people do exist. Okay, they don't want us all dead. They want us to be good Americans. Okay, so that is the very long story of how the Reform Party got around Kalakaua and signed over Pearl Harbor without his consent. Okay? It's important to remember, the point of the Bayonet Constitution is the Reciprocity Treaty. Sometimes we go through all of this and people forget those two things are connected. The whole point of Bayonet is to renew the Reciprocity Treaty and get rid of the tariffs on sugar. Keep away the tariffs on sugar. It's all about sugar tariffs, all the way up until statehood. Okay. So Kalakaua reigns for 4 more years, kind of a broken man. He gets sick. He goes to San Francisco and dies there. This is 1891. Although there is some new research saying that Kalakaua didn't just give up completely, he tried to keep fighting back all along during those 4 years, as much as he could. Okay, and then he's lying in state, his funeral, and Kalakaua's last words, they kind of sum up the whole reign. They really do. Tell my people I tried. To me, those words really sum up his reign, because his reign is sort of good intention, bad result. And final discussion question, strength and weaknesses. Is this setting the stage for the overthrow? That's a pretty obvious question. It seems like it is. I mean, Liliuokalani comes into the throne under the Bayonet Constitution. A lot of people don't realize that. Liliuokalani doesn't actually have very much power at even the very beginning of her reign. We're going to talk more about that. But some people would think of the Bayonet Constitution as like the overthrow before the overthrow. That by the time of the overthrow, it's kind of a formality that the monarchy has already lost its power. Okay?